When my son-in-law mocked my old clothes at the restaurant, I smiled and said nothing. Little did he know that I owned the entire chain. By the end of the evening, he would learn a powerful lesson about respect. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. Are you really going to wear that? My daughter Sarah's voice carried an edge I'd grown too familiar with since she'd married Bradley 3 years ago. I looked down at my faded blue jeans and the worn flannel shirt I'd had for over a decade. They were clean, comfortable, and to me, perfectly suitable for a casual dinner. "What's wrong with what I'm wearing?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Sarah sighed, the sound heavy with embarrassment. "Dad, we're going to Sapphire. It's one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. Bradley made reservations weeks ago to impress his new boss. You can't show up looking like what?" I prompted gently. "Like you just came from feeding chickens on a farm," Bradley said, striding into the room. He wore a tailored suit that probably cost more than I spent on clothes in 5 years. His Italian leather shoes gleamed under the lights of my modest living room. "No offense, Howard, but you look like a homeless person. Don't you own anything decent?" I felt the familiar sting of his casual disrespect but kept my expression neutral. At 65, I'd learned that reactions only gave people like Bradley more ammunition. "These clothes are comfortable," I said simply, "and they're clean." Bradley exchanged a look with Sarah that made my heart ache. When had my bright, kind daughter started looking at me through someone else's critical eyes? "Dad, please," Sarah pleaded. "This dinner is really important for Bradley's career. His boss is bringing his wife, and they're very particular about appearances." I looked at my daughter's anxious face and nodded slowly. "I understand. Let me see what I can find." I walked to my bedroom, hearing Bradley's whispered comment as I left. "I swear, Sarah, sometimes I wonder if your father even cares about our future. Does he want people to think we come from nothing?" In my bedroom, I opened my closet and stared at the row of simple, practical clothes. Among them hung a garment bag containing a suit I'd bought 5 years ago for my wife Eleanor's funeral. I hadn't worn it since that rainy Tuesday when I'd said goodbye to the love of my life. I unzipped the bag and touched the dark fabric, feeling a wave of grief wash over me. Eleanor would have known exactly what to say to Bradley. She never let anyone disrespect me, or herself. Her absence still felt like a physical wound some days. I put on the suit, which hung a bit loose now. Grief and age had trimmed me down over the years. As I knotted my tie, I glanced at the photographs on my dresser. One showed me and Eleanor on our wedding day 40 years ago. Another showed us at the opening of the first Sapphire restaurant 25 years ago, champagne glasses raised in triumph. If only Bradley knew. When I emerged from the bedroom, Sarah's expression softened. "You look nice, Dad." Bradley gave me a cursory glance and nodded. "Better. Though that suit looks like it's from another century." He checked his watch impatiently. "We should go." I don't want to keep Richard waiting. The drive to Sapphire was filled with Bradley's one-sided conversation about his boss, Richard Townsend, and how this dinner could lead to a promotion that would finally let them afford the lakeside house they'd been eyeing. "It's got 6 bedrooms, Bradley said, steering his BMW through traffic. "Perfect for when we start having kids." 6 bedrooms? I asked from the back seat. "That seems excessive for a young family." Bradley's eyes met mine in the rearview mirror with a flash of irritation. "Howard, in my world, appearances matter. The right address, the right schools, the right connections. These things open doors." "And close others," I said quietly, but neither of them seemed to hear me. Sapphire's familiar blue awning came into view as we pulled up to the valet stand. The young valet opened the doors with a practiced smile that faltered slightly when he saw my slightly ill-fitting suit. Bradley handed over his keys with the casual arrogance of someone used to being served. As we approached the entrance, The maître d' looked up from his reservation book, his eyes widening in recognition when he saw me. "Mr. Mitchell, what a wonderful surprise," he said warmly. Bradley frowned, clearly surprised by the enthusiastic greeting directed not at him but at his father-in-law. "Hello, Robert," I said with a smile. "How's your daughter doing at college?" "Thriving, sir, thanks to the scholarship." "We can never thank you enough." Bradley's confusion deepened. "You know each other?" "Oh, yes," Robert said. "Mr. Mitchell is an old customer," I interrupted gently. "Robert, we're joining the Townsend party tonight. I believe my son-in-law made the reservation." Understanding flashed in Robert's eyes. "Of course, sir. Right this way. The Townsends haven't arrived yet, but I'll seat you at our best table." As we followed Robert through the elegant dining room, I noticed Bradley's eyes darting around, taking in the crystal chandeliers, the hand-painted murals, the impeccably dressed waitstaff. Sapphire was indeed exclusive. And expensive. A dinner for 4 could easily cost over $600. "Here we are," Robert said, gesturing to a prime table in the restaurant's center. "Your server tonight will be Melissa. Can I start you with some champagne while you wait for the rest of your party? Perhaps the Cristal 2008, Mr. Mitchell?" On the house, of course. Before I could respond, Bradley interjected. "We'll wait for my boss, thank you." Robert nodded politely and left us. Bradley immediately leaned forward. "How does the maitre d' know you by name? And what was that about a scholarship?" I shrugged. "I eat here sometimes." "On your pension?" Bradley scoffed. "This place costs a fortune." "Bradley," Sarah warned, but he was already continuing. "And what's with the on-the-house offer? Are you running some kind of tab you can't pay? Because I'm not covering for you if—" "The Townsends are here," I said quietly, nodding toward the entrance where Robert was greeting a distinguished-looking couple. Bradley instantly transformed, his irritated expression replaced by an eager smile as he stood to greet his boss. Richard Townsend was a tall man in his 50s with silver-streaked hair and a confident bearing. His wife Carolyn was elegant in a simple black dress, her smile warm but assessing. "Bradley, good to see you," Richard said, shaking his hand before turning to Sarah. "And this must be the lovely wife I've heard so much about." "Sarah Harrington," my daughter said, extending her hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you both." "And who's this?" Caroline asked, looking at me with curiosity. "This is Sarah's father, Howard Mitchell," Bradley said dismissively. "He's visiting from upstate." Richard's eyebrows rose slightly. "Howard Mitchell." "Not the Howard Mitchell." Bradley laughed nervously. "I doubt it. My father-in-law is a retired factory worker." I extended my hand to Richard. "It's nice to meet you, Mr. Townsend."
Recognition dawned in Richard's eyes as we shook hands, but he said nothing, merely smiling as we all took our seats. The server approached immediately, professionally dressed in Sapphire's signature midnight blue uniform. "Good evening. I'm Melissa, and I'll be taking care of you tonight." Her eyes lingered on me for a moment, a flash of recognition quickly masked by professionalism. "May I start you with some drinks? Perhaps a bottle of wine for the table?" "We'll have your best bottle of Cabernet," Bradley said confidently. "Actually," Richard interjected, "I believe we should defer to Mr. Mitchell for the wine selection. I understand he has quite the palate." Bradley's smile froze. "My father-in-law? He drinks beer from a can." The table fell silent. I saw Sarah's cheeks flush with embarrassment. "I'm sure whatever you choose will be excellent," I said to Richard, choosing to ignore Bradley's comment. Melissa cleared her throat. "Actually, Chef Williams would like to know if he could prepare a special tasting menu for the table tonight. He says it would be his honor." Mr. Mitchell Bradley's confusion was turning to irritation. "Why does everyone here keep acting like they know you?" "A tasting menu sounds wonderful," I said to Melissa. "Please thank Antonio for me." As Melissa left, Richard turned to me with undisguised interest. So, Howard, how long has it been since your last visit to Sapphire? About 6 months, I answered. I've been traveling, visiting some of our other locations. Other locations? Bradley echoed, his voice rising slightly. What are you talking about? Caroline Townsend looked between us with growing amusement. Bradley, don't you know who your father-in-law is? Bradley shook his head, increasingly frustrated. Sarah looked equally confused. Dad? She questioned. What's going on? I sighed, realizing the moment had come sooner than I'd planned. I own Sapphire, I said quietly. Not just this restaurant, but all 28 locations across the country. The silence that followed was deafening. The look on Bradley's face was something between shock and disbelief, his mouth opening and closing without producing any sound. Sarah stared at me as though seeing a stranger. You own Sapphire? She finally managed. How is that possible? Richard Townsend chuckled. Howard Mitchell is one of the most successful restaurant entrepreneurs in the country. Sapphire Group has been on the Fortune 500 list for the past decade. He turned to me with genuine respect. I had no idea Bradley was your son-in-law. It's an honor to meet you, sir. Bradley's complexion had turned an alarming shade of red. This is some kind of joke, right? Howard lives in a modest house in Albany. He wears the same clothes until they fall apart. He clips coupons, for God's sake. I took a sip of water, gathering my thoughts. I've never seen the point of flashy displays of wealth. Your mother felt the same way, I added, looking at Sarah, whose eyes were filling with tears. But Mom's medical bills, she began. We struggled after she got sick. You took extra shifts at the factory. The chef appeared at our table then, saving me from having to respond immediately. Antonio Williams was one of the brightest culinary talents I'd discovered in the past decade, a young man from South Chicago whose food told stories of his heritage and journey. Mr. Mitchell, he said warmly, it's been too long. I've prepared something special tonight, including that truffle risotto Mrs. Mitchell always loved. I felt a pang at the mention of Eleanor. Thank you, Antonio. She always said your risotto was better than any she'd had in Italy. As Antonio described the evening's menu, I watched Bradley's face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and dawning horror as he began to realize the magnitude of his misjudgment. The subtle looks exchanged between the Townsends suggested they were reassessing everything they thought they knew about their employee. When we were alone again, I decided it was time for the full truth. Yes, I worked at a factory, I began. That's where I started. Midnight shifts on the assembly line while putting myself through business school during the day. I was 30 when I opened my first restaurant, a tiny diner with 6 tables and a dream. But you never said anything, Sarah said, her voice small. All these years. Your mother and I wanted you to have a normal childhood, I explained. We didn't want you to grow up feeling different from your friends or thinking money made you special. We wanted you to learn the value of work, of treating people with respect regardless of what they do or what they wear. I looked pointedly at Bradley, who had the grace to look away. When your mother got sick, I continued, we decided to keep our finances private. Her cancer battle was difficult enough without the added complication of managing other people's reactions to our wealth. It was her wish, and I honored it. So the house in Albany, the factory job. Sarah trailed off, trying to reconcile her memories with this new reality. The house is one of my favorites because it's where you grew up, I said gently. I did work at the factory. I own it. Mitchell Manufacturing produces all the custom furniture for every Sapphire restaurant. I go there regularly to oversee operations and design new pieces. Richard Townsend leaned forward with interest. The furniture at Sapphire has always impressed me. The craftsmanship is remarkable. Thank you, I said. We employ over 300 skilled craftspeople across 3 states. The first course arrived, a delicate sea scallop with citrus and microgreens, momentarily pausing our conversation. I watched as Bradley stared at his plate, clearly struggling to process everything he'd just learned. Why live so simply? He finally asked, his tone somewhere between accusing and bewildered. Why drive a 10-year-old Toyota when you could have a fleet of luxury cars? I considered his question carefully. I grew up poor in rural Pennsylvania. My father worked in coal mines until black lung took him when I was 12. My mother cleaned houses to keep food on our table. I learned early that happiness has very little to do with the things you own. I paused as memories washed over me. When I met Eleanor in college, she was studying art and waiting tables. We fell in love and dreamed of opening a restaurant that would feel like home but serve extraordinary food. We worked 80-hour weeks for years, lived above our first restaurant, saved every penny. Mom was part of building all this? Sarah asked, a new understanding dawning in her eyes. She was the heart of it, I replied, my voice growing thick with emotion. She named Sapphire, after the color of the lake where we had our first date. She designed the interiors, created the ambiance you see around you. This was our shared dream. As I spoke, servers brought the next course. The truffle risotto Antonio had mentioned. The rich aroma filled the air, bringing with it a flood of memories. When success came, we had long discussions about how to handle it. We'd seen how wealth changed people, created distance between parents and children. We decided our relationships were more important than displays of affluence. We lived well but modestly. We focused on experiences rather than possessions. I looked directly at Bradley. The clothes I wear are chosen for comfort and durability, not to impress others. I don't judge people by their appearance, and I expect the same courtesy in return. Bradley had the decency to look ashamed. Caroline Townsend, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. I think that's admirable, Howard. In our circles, we see too many people who have wealth but no wisdom about how to use it meaningfully. Richard nodded in agreement. The Sapphire Group is known for more than just exceptional restaurants. Your charitable foundation has done remarkable work with culinary education in underserved communities. That was Eleanor's initiative, I said. She believed talent is equally distributed, but opportunity is not. We've sent over 200 young people to culinary school who otherwise couldn't have afforded it. Many of them now work as chefs in our restaurants. Sarah was looking at me with new eyes, as though seeing me clearly for the first time in years. Why didn't you tell me after Mom died? I'm an adult now. I reached across the table and took her hand. After we lost your mother, I was lost myself for a while. Then you met Bradley, and your life seemed to be moving in a different direction. You became increasingly impressed by displays of wealth, by status symbols. I glanced at Bradley. I worried that knowing about the money would change you further, pull you even more from the values your mother and I had tried to instill. So you just let us believe you were barely getting by? The hurt in her voice was unmistakable. I let you believe I was living within my means, I corrected gently. Which I am. I never pretended to be struggling. You assumed that based on my lifestyle choices. The third course arrived. A perfectly prepared duck breast with cherry reduction. The timing gave everyone a moment to collect their thoughts. Bradley, who had been uncharacteristically silent, finally spoke. How many restaurants exactly? And what's the company worth? The naked calculation in his voice made me sad but not surprised. Bradley, Sarah hissed, embarrassed. It's a fair question, I said evenly. Sapphire Group includes 28 fine dining establishments across North America, 15 casual bistros under the Blue Plate brand, and a small hotel chain. The company's current valuation is approximately $3.8 billion. Bradley choked on his wine. Richard Townsend patted him on the back with thinly veiled amusement. Of course, I continued, I'm not the sole owner anymore. We went public 5 years ago, though I retain controlling interest. The employee stock ownership program holds 20%. Everyone from dishwashers to managers shares in our success. Billion with a B? Bradley whispered, his eyes wide. I ignored him and turned to Sarah. Your mother and I always planned to tell you everything when you turned 30. She made me promise. That's next month. I reached into my jacket and pulled out an envelope. This was supposed to be your birthday gift, but perhaps tonight is better. Sarah took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a letter in Eleanor's handwriting and legal documents transferring 10% of Sapphire Group shares into Sarah's name. Mom wrote this? Sarah asked, tears streaming down her face as she recognized the handwriting. Before she died, I nodded. She wanted you to understand our choices and to have a foundation to build your own life, not a crutch to avoid living it fully. As Sarah read her mother's letter in silence, I noticed Bradley's expression changing, calculation replacing shock as he processed the implications of his wife's newly revealed wealth. The Townsends watched with the awkward discomfort of people witnessing an intensely personal family moment. I think, Richard said diplomatically, this calls for a toast. He signaled the server, who promptly brought a bottle of champagne. 2 family legacies, honestly earned and wisely preserved. We raised our glasses. Sarah's eyes met mine over the rim, filled with questions and a new understanding. Bradley's gaze, I couldn't help but notice, was fixed on the legal documents beside Sarah's plate. The evening was far from over, and the full reckoning with Bradley had not yet begun. But as we sipped our champagne in the restaurant my wife and I had built from nothing, I felt Eleanor's presence strongly. She would have handled this moment with more grace than I could muster, but she would have been just as firm in defending the values we had spent a lifetime building, values worth far more than any fortune. The remainder of the dinner with the Townsends proceeded with a strange undercurrent of tension. Bradley had transformed entirely, suddenly treating me with exaggerated deference that was almost more offensive than his previous condescension. Sarah remained quiet, occasionally glancing at me with a look that mingled hurt and wonder, the letter from her mother clutched tightly in her hand. Richard and Caroline Townsend, to their credit, handled the awkward situation with remarkable grace, steering conversation toward safer topics like travel and food. By the time dessert arrived, a signature chocolate soufflé that had been Eleanor's favorite, the Townsends had tactfully mentioned they had an early flight the next morning and would need to leave soon. It's been a truly memorable evening, Richard said as he shook my hand goodbye. I hope we'll have the chance to speak again under less surprising circumstances. Caroline embraced me warmly. Eleanor's legacy clearly lives on, not just in these beautiful restaurants, but in the values you've maintained. She must have been a remarkable woman. The best decision I ever made was asking her to dance at that college mixer, I replied, feeling the familiar ache of her absence. After the Townsends departed, a heavy silence fell over our table. Bradley was the first to break it, his voice taking on the smooth, persuasive tone he used when trying to close a business deal. Howard, Dad, I feel terrible about how I've treated you. If you'd known I was wealthy, you would have treated me with respect, I interrupted, my voice level. That's precisely the problem, Bradley. The server approached with the check, placing it discreetly on the table. Bradley reached for it, clearly eager to demonstrate his new appreciation for his father-in-law. Allow me, he said magnanimously. I raised an eyebrow. The meal has already been taken care of. Of course, Bradley said, flustered. I just thought, as a gesture would have been treating me with basic courtesy regardless of what you thought was in my bank account, I said quietly. Sarah placed her hand on mine. Dad, we should talk about all this. There's so much I want to know, so much to understand. We will, I promised, but not tonight, and not with Bradley present. I turned to my son-in-law. I'd like you to go wait in the car. I need a few minutes alone with my daughter. Bradley's jaw tightened. Sarah is my wife. Whatever you have to say to her. Bradley, please, Sarah interrupted. Just give us a moment. He hesitated, clearly calculating whether defiance or compliance would better serve his interests. Finally, he nodded stiffly and stood up. I'll be in the car. Take your time. As Bradley walked away, I watched his straight shoulders and measured stride, a man working hard to maintain his dignity while his world shifted beneath him. Despite everything, I felt a twinge of sympathy. Finding out your unassuming father-in-law was actually a billionaire would be disorienting for anyone. When we were alone, Sarah looked at me, her eyes shining with unshed tears. All these years I thought I knew you. But there was this whole other life you kept hidden from me. I'm still the same father who taught you to ride a bike and checked under your bed for monsters, I said gently. The restaurants, the money, Those are just things I have, not who I am. But they're part of who you are, she insisted. This company you and Mom built together, it's your life's work, and I knew nothing about it. I couldn't argue with that. You're right. Perhaps keeping it from you for so long was a mistake. Your mother and I debated it many times. Why did Bradley know who you were when I didn't? The hurt in her voice was palpable. He didn't, I clarified. Richard Townsend recognized my name, that's all. Sarah twisted her napkin in her hands. When Mom was sick, those medical bills, you made it seem like we were struggling financially. I worried about you being alone, not having enough for retirement. I never actually said we were struggling, I corrected gently. I said the bills were substantial, which they were. Your mother wanted the best care, and she received it, but she insisted we maintain our normal life during her illness. She didn't want to be treated differently because of her diagnosis or our means. So the factory job, the coupons, the budget discussions I overheard? The factory is real, though my role there is different than you assumed. The budget discussions were about Sapphire's expansion plans. And the coupons? I smiled slightly. That's just good sense. Why pay more than necessary for something? Sarah laughed, despite herself, a sound so like her mother's it made my heart clench. That does sound like you. Her expression grew serious again. But Dad, I'm 30 next month. Don't you think I deserved to know before now? Perhaps, I acknowledged. But your mother and I saw how wealth changed our friends' children. Kids who grew up entitled, expecting the world to bend to their wishes. We wanted more for you. We wanted you to develop your own identity, your own work ethic, your own values. And then I married Bradley, Sarah said quietly, realization dawning in her eyes. You married someone who judges people by their clothes and their bank accounts, I said carefully. Someone who treated your father disrespectfully because he assumed I had no value to offer him. Sarah couldn't meet my eyes. I've noticed it too, she admitted. The way he treats servers in restaurants, the comments about people's cars or houses. At first I thought it was just ambition, wanting a better life for us. There's nothing wrong with ambition, I said. Your mother and I were ambitious, but we never stepped on others to elevate ourselves.
Sarah looked at her mother's letter, still clutched in her hand. In her letter, Mom wrote that the truest measure of a person is how they treat those who can do nothing for them. She looked up, her eyes filling with tears. I've lost sight of that somehow. I reached across the table and took her hand. We all stray from our values sometimes. The important thing is finding our way back. The restaurant had emptied around us, the staff discreetly cleaning up while giving us space for our conversation. Antonio appeared briefly to say goodnight, his normally jovial face serious as he sensed the emotional weight of our discussion. Your mother would be so proud of the woman you've become, I said. You have her compassion, her intelligence. That's why I believe you'll make the right decisions going forward, whatever they may be. About Bradley, you mean? Sarah said, her voice barely audible. I nodded. About Bradley. About your role in the company if you want one, about the kind of life you want to build. These are all your choices to make. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. I need time to think. Of course, I agreed. But there's something I need to tell you first, something I should have shared long ago. I took a deep breath. I'm selling the house in Albany. What? Why? You love that house. I do. It's filled with memories of you and your mother, but it's time for me to move on. I hesitated. I'm donating most of the proceeds to the foundation and moving into the penthouse above this restaurant. It was your mother's design, her last project before she got sick. I've never had the heart to live there without her, but it's time. Sarah squeezed my hand. Can I see it? Now? Yes. Before I go home to figure things out with Bradley. I nodded and stood up, offering her my arm. Robert, I called to the maitre d', would you tell Mr. Harrington that we'll be a while longer? and have Antonio send up a bottle of the 2005 Bordeaux to the penthouse, please?" "Of course, Mr. Mitchell," Robert replied with a discreet nod. As I led Sarah toward the private elevator at the back of the restaurant, I felt a curious lightness. The secrets I'd carried for so many years were finally being revealed, for better or worse. I thought of Eleanor and how she would have handled this evening, with more grace than I had managed, certainly, but with the same unwavering commitment to our shared values. The elevator doors opened to reveal the penthouse foyer, where a simple plaque read, "Eleanor's Place," in elegant script. Sarah's gasp echoed in the quiet space. "Mom designed this?" she whispered as we stepped into a space that perfectly captured Eleanor's aesthetic. Warm, inviting luxury without ostentation. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a spectacular view of the city lights, but it was the wall of family photographs that drew Sarah's immediate attention. "These are all from our camping trips, my dance recitals." She moved along the wall, touching the frames gently. "You've had these up here all this time?" "I come here sometimes to feel close to her," I admitted, "and to remember what matters most." Sarah turned to me, her expression resolute. "I want to know everything. About the business, about you and Mom, about the foundation. I want to understand the legacy that's apparently mine now." "And you will," I promised. "We have all the time in the world for that." What we didn't have time for, though neither of us mentioned it, was Bradley waiting impatiently in the car below, probably already calculating how to best leverage his wife's newly discovered fortune. That conversation, and its inevitable consequences, would come soon enough. By the time we descended from the penthouse 2 hours later, the restaurant had closed to the public. Only Robert remained at his post, along with a security guard by the entrance. Outside, Bradley's BMW was still visible in the parking lot, his silhouette recognizable behind the wheel. Sarah had spent the time absorbing the reality of her mother's final project, the stunning apartment with its carefully chosen art pieces, the kitchen designed for someone who understood food as both art and comfort, the small office lined with photographs of restaurant openings and charity events. We'd shared a bottle of wine on the terrace overlooking the city, and I'd answered her questions about the business, about her mother's role in building it, about the foundation that bore her name. "I should have told you everything years ago," I admitted as we rode the elevator down. "I was trying to protect you, but perhaps I was also protecting myself, keeping Eleanor's memory and our shared dreams in a place where they couldn't be tarnished." "By people like Bradley," Sarah said quietly, no question in her voice. I didn't confirm or deny her statement. Some realizations needed to be reached independently. Robert straightened as the elevator doors opened. "Mr. Mitchell, there's something you should know. Mr. Harrington has been insistent about coming inside. When we explained the restaurant was closed, he became rather agitated. He's called several times on the house phone." Sarah closed her eyes briefly, a flash of embarrassment crossing her features. "I'm sorry, Robert. I should have checked in with him." "No need to apologize, Ms. Mitchell," Robert replied, using her maiden name with what seemed like deliberate intent. "Security has been keeping an eye on the situation." I nodded my thanks to Robert. "We'll handle it from here. Please lock up after us." As we approached the exit, I could see Bradley pacing outside, his phone to his ear. When he spotted us through the glass doors, he quickly ended his call and hurried over, his expression a carefully constructed mask of concern. "Sarah, I've been worried sick," he said as soon as we stepped outside. "It's almost midnight. You weren't answering your phone." Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, which showed several missed calls. "I'm sorry. I turned it off during dinner and forgot to check it." Bradley's gaze shifted between us, clearly trying to read the situation. "Is everything okay?" "We had a lot to talk about," I said neutrally. "Family history, mostly." Bradley's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I can imagine. Finding out your father is Howard Mitchell must be quite the shock. He turned to me with a deferential nod that felt entirely insincere. I hope you can forgive my behavior earlier, Howard. If I'd had any idea who you were, if you'd known I was wealthy, you would have treated me differently. I finished for him. That's precisely the problem, isn't it? Bradley's smile faltered. I think you're misinterpreting. I'm not, I interrupted, my voice firm but calm. You've made your values quite clear, Bradley. You judge people by their clothes, their possessions, their apparent usefulness to your ambitions. That's your prerogative. But don't insult me by pretending otherwise. The pretense of congeniality dropped from Bradley's face. Fine. I misjudged you. I admit it. But you deliberately misled us. Living like some working-class retiree when you're actually a billionaire. Who does that? Someone who values character over currency, Sarah said quietly. Someone who wanted to see who I would become without the distortion field of wealth. Bradley turned to her, surprised by her intervention. His expression quickly softened. Sarah, baby, I understand you're processing a lot right now. Let's go home and talk about this privately. He reached for her arm. Sarah stepped back. I'm not going home with you tonight, Bradley. The silence that followed was absolute. Bradley's face registered shock, then confusion, then calculation. What do you mean? He asked carefully. Where will you go? I'm going to stay in the penthouse, she said. I need time to think. Bradley's eyes narrowed. Time to think about what, exactly? About our marriage, Sarah replied, her voice stronger now. About who we are together and whether that's who I want to be. Bradley's mask slipped entirely, replaced by cold anger. This is ridiculous. You're angry about a few comments about your father's clothes? Comments that were completely justified based on what I knew at the time? This isn't about the clothes, Sarah said. It's about the fact that you've never, not once, asked my father about his life, his experiences, his knowledge. You dismissed him as irrelevant because you thought he had nothing to offer you. That's not fair, Bradley protested, but his eyes shifted away, betraying the truth of her words. It's entirely fair, I interjected. You've made your contempt for me obvious from the beginning. The only thing that's changed tonight is that you've realized your mistake might cost you access to my fortune. Bradley's face flushed. This is outrageous. You're trying to turn my wife against me. I'm not trying to do anything except protect my daughter's interests, I said calmly. Your daughter's interests? Bradley laughed bitterly. You kept her in the dark about her own inheritance for decades. You let her believe you were struggling while sitting on billions. What kind of father does that? The kind who values character development over material comfort, I replied. The kind who wanted his daughter to find someone who loved her for herself, not her bank account. Bradley's expression turned ugly. Well, that plan backfired, didn't it? Because now she's married to someone who doesn't. Bradley's expression turned ugly. Well, that plan backfired, didn't it? Because now she's married to someone who doesn't appreciate being manipulated and lied to for years. I never lied, I said calmly. I simply chose not to volunteer information about my wealth. A lie of omission is still a lie, Bradley shot back. And now you're using this revelation to drive a wedge between me and my wife. Sarah stepped forward. Stop it, both of you. This isn't helping. She turned to Bradley, her voice firm. I need some time alone to process everything. This isn't just about tonight or about my father's wealth. It's about patterns I've been noticing in our marriage that concern me. Bradley's demeanor instantly changed, his anger morphing into practiced concern. What patterns, honey? Whatever it is, we can work on it together. The way you judge people based on their appearance or status, Sarah said. The way you dismissed my father because you thought he was just a factory worker. The way you talk about our friends who don't make as much money as you do." "That's not fair," Bradley protested. "I'm ambitious, that's all." "I want the best for us." "The best things or the best life?" Sarah asked quietly. "Because I'm starting to think they aren't the same." Bradley glanced at me, his expression calculating. "This isn't the place for this conversation. Let's go home and discuss this privately." "I told you I'm staying at the penthouse tonight," Sarah repeated firmly. "You can't be serious," Bradley said, his voice rising. "You're choosing to stay with the father who's been lying to you your entire life instead of going home with your husband?" "I'm choosing to take the space I need to think clearly," Sarah replied. "And yes, I want to spend time with my father and learn more about the business my mother helped build." Bradley's face hardened. "This is about the money, isn't it? Now that you know about your inheritance, you're reconsidering whether you need me at all." "That's not—" "Don't deny it," Bradley cut her off. "The timing is pretty convenient. You find out you're an heiress to a fortune, and suddenly our marriage needs reevaluation." He made air quotes with his fingers, his face twisted with disdain. "If that's what you think of me after 3 years of marriage," Sarah said softly, "then maybe we have even more to think about than I realized."
Bradley looked between us, seeming to calculate his next move. Finally, he turned to me, his voice cold. "You know, Howard, I always thought there was something off about you. The way you lived so small. It seemed pathetic, really. But now I get it. It wasn't modesty. It was manipulation. You've been testing everyone around you, playing God with your little secrets." "I've been living according to my values," I replied evenly. "Something you might want to try sometime." "My values include honesty and transparency with my spouse," Bradley shot back. "Unlike yours, apparently." "Dad was respecting Mom's wishes," Sarah interjected. "She wanted me to develop my own identity before knowing about the inheritance." "Convenient excuse," Bradley scoffed, "and you're falling for it." He turned back to me, his eyes narrowed. "Just how long have you been planning this little revelation? Waiting for the perfect moment to humiliate me?" "This wasn't planned at all," I said truthfully. "If you'd treated me with basic respect from the beginning, tonight would have gone very differently." Bradley laughed bitterly. "So this is punishment? Teaching the arrogant son-in-law a lesson?" "This is consequence," I corrected. "Your behavior created this situation, not me." Bradley's face flushed with anger. "You self-righteous old man. You think your money makes you superior, that it gives you the right to judge me? No, Bradley. My values make me different from you, not superior, and everyone has the right to judge the character of those they allow into their lives." Bradley turned to Sarah, switching tactics again. "Sarah, baby, please. Don't let one bad evening destroy everything we've built together. I admit I made a mistake with how I treated your father. I can do better." Sarah looked at him for a long moment. "That's just it, Bradley. I don't think this was a mistake. I think this was you showing me who you really are when you thought there was nothing to be gained by pretending otherwise." The security guard had moved closer, clearly concerned by the escalating tension. Bradley noticed and straightened his shoulders, making a visible effort to control himself. "Fine," he said coldly. "Take your time to think. But remember, I'm your husband. We took vows. This fortune of yours, it's half mine legally. Something to consider while you're up in Daddy's penthouse contemplating your options." The naked threat hung in the air between us. Sarah paled slightly but stood her ground. "Good night, Bradley." He stared at her for a moment longer, then turned and stalked toward his car. As he reached for the door handle, he looked back at us. "This isn't over." Not by a long shot. We watched in silence as he got into his BMW and drove away, tires squealing on the asphalt. "I'm sorry," I said softly once he was gone. "This isn't how I wanted tonight to go." Sarah turned to me, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Did you know?" About how he really felt about you? About people he considered beneath him? I suspected, I admitted. But I hoped I was wrong, for your sake. Sarah nodded slowly. I think part of me knew too. I just didn't want to see it. She took a deep breath. What happens now? I placed my hand gently on her shoulder. Now we go upstairs, and you get some rest. Tomorrow is soon enough to figure out the next steps. As we walked back toward the entrance where Robert waited patiently, Sarah stopped suddenly. His threat about the money. Can he really claim half of my inheritance? No, I said confidently. Your mother and I planned carefully. The shares are in a protected trust with very specific conditions, and they weren't transferred until tonight, after his true character was revealed. Sarah looked at me with dawning understanding. You did plan this. Not exactly, I clarified. I didn't plan for Bradley to behave so poorly or for the Townsends to recognize me. But I did plan to tell you everything soon, and I wanted to understand exactly who your husband was before that happened. You were protecting me, she said softly. Always, I replied. Just as your mother would have wanted. As Robert held the door for us, I couldn't help but think about Bradley's parting words. This isn't over. I suspected he was right about that. A man like Bradley, faced with the prospect of losing access to a fortune he'd just discovered, wouldn't surrender easily. But neither would I. I'd built a business empire from nothing, weathered recessions and competitors and the devastating loss of my beloved wife. Protecting my daughter from a gold-digging opportunist would be unpleasant but not impossible. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for tonight, I was simply grateful to have my daughter back. The real Sarah, not the woman who had been slowly transforming into a reflection of her husband's values. As we entered the elevator, Sarah leaned against my shoulder the way she used to as a child. I've missed you, Dad. The real you. I've been here all along, I replied, wrapping my arm around her shoulders. And I'm not going anywhere. The next morning, Sarah and I shared breakfast on the penthouse terrace. She had slept in her mother's old study, surrounded by photographs of our family and mementos from Eleanor's life. I'd risen early, as was my habit, instructing the kitchen to send up coffee and pastries. I've been thinking all night, Sarah said, cradling her coffee mug. About Bradley, about us, about Mom's letter. I nodded, giving her space to gather her thoughts. I keep asking myself when things changed, when I started caring so much about appearances and status. She looked out over the city, the morning sunlight catching in her hair. I think it happened so gradually I didn't even notice. That's often how it works, I said gently. Small compromises that don't seem significant in the moment. Bradley was so charming when we met, she continued. Ambitious, yes, but I admired that. His dreams seemed exciting, his confidence attractive. But somewhere along the way, his ambition turned into something ugly. This constant need to impress people, to acquire more, to judge others by what they could offer him. And you started adopting those values, I suggested carefully. Sarah nodded, her expression pained. I did. I started caring about living in the right neighborhood, wearing the right brands, being invited to the right parties. She looked at me directly. I became embarrassed by your old Toyota and your worn clothes. Me, embarrassed by my own father who built all this. She gestured toward the city below us, where several Sapphire restaurant signs were visible from our vantage point. We all lose our way sometimes, I said. Your mother did too, early in our success. There was a period when the money was still new, when she got caught up in buying expensive things, trying to impress old friends who had once looked down on us. Sarah looked surprised. Mom? But she was always so grounded. She found her way back to her values, I explained. One day she donated half her wardrobe to a women's shelter and said she was done trying to prove herself through possessions. She said she wanted our success to mean something more than just accumulation. Sarah smiled at that. That sounds like the mom I remember. My phone buzzed with an incoming text. I glanced at it briefly. A message from Antonio, the chef, checking if we needed anything. I responded quickly and set the phone aside. No Bradley? Sarah asked, having noticed the message wasn't from him. Not yet, I replied, though I expect we'll hear from him soon enough. As if summoned by our conversation, my phone began to ring. The screen showed Robert from the restaurant downstairs. "Howard Mitchell," I answered. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm sorry to disturb you, but Mr. Harrington is here demanding to see you and Miss Mitchell. He's quite insistent and causing something of a scene in the lobby." I sighed. "We'll be down shortly. Please have security on standby, just in case." Sarah looked at me questioningly as I ended the call. "Bradley's downstairs," I explained, apparently making a scene. Sarah closed her eyes briefly. I should have expected this. He's never taken rejection well. She stood up, straightening her shoulders. "Let's get this over with." As we rode the elevator down to the restaurant level, I noticed Sarah's hands trembling slightly. "You don't have to do this now," I told her. "I can handle Bradley." She shook her head. "No, Dad. I need to do this myself. I've been letting other people make my decisions for too long." The elevator doors opened to reveal a tense scene. Bradley stood in the center of the empty restaurant, engaged in what appeared to be a heated argument with Robert. Two security guards positioned themselves discreetly nearby. When he saw us, Bradley broke off mid-sentence and strode toward the elevator.
"There you are," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. He was dressed impeccably in another expensive suit, his hair perfectly styled, but his eyes betrayed a night without sleep. "I've been trying to reach you all night, Sarah." "I turned off my phone," Sarah replied calmly. "I needed time to think." Bradley glanced around at the staff, who were trying to appear busy while clearly monitoring the situation. "Can we talk somewhere private?" I nodded to Robert, who immediately led us to a small private dining room and closed the door behind us. The room, designed for intimate business meetings, featured a round table with 4 chairs and tasteful artwork on the walls, including, I noted with some irony, a small painting Eleanor had purchased at a struggling artist's first gallery show 20 years ago. It was now worth over $300,000. "Well, this is cozy," Bradley said sarcastically as we took our seats. "The Mitchell family reunion, complete with the long-lost billions." "Bradley," Sarah said, her voice surprisingly steady, "I understand you're upset." "Upset? That doesn't begin to cover it," he interrupted. "My wife disappears for the night after dropping a bombshell about her secret inheritance, refuses to answer my calls, and now wants to talk. What exactly is there to talk about, Sarah? The fact that you and your father have been lying to me throughout our entire relationship?" "I never lied to you about my family," Sarah said. "I told you exactly who my parents were. My father worked at a factory. My mother was an artist who died of cancer. All of that is true." "By omission, Sarah," Bradley's voice rose sharply, "you conveniently left out the part where your father owns the factory and happens to be one of the richest men in the country." "I didn't know," Sarah said simply. Bradley stared at her, his expression shifting from anger to calculation. "You really didn't know?" He glanced at me. "She really didn't know?" I nodded. "As I explained last night, my wife and I decided to keep our wealth private until Sarah turned 30. She's as surprised by all this as you are." Bradley leaned back in his chair, processing this information. His anger seemed to recede slightly, replaced by that familiar look of assessment I'd seen too many times, the look of a man figuring out the angle, the advantage, the play. "Okay," he said, his voice softening. "I understand now. This has been a shock for everyone." He reached for Sarah's hand across the table. "I'm sorry about last night, honey. I overreacted. Finding out your father-in-law is Howard Mitchell would throw anyone off balance." Sarah didn't pull her hand away, but she didn't return his grasp either. "It's not just about last night, Bradley." "What do you mean?" His tone remained conciliatory, but I noticed the slight narrowing of his eyes. "Last night was a revelation in more ways than one," Sarah said carefully. Seeing how you treated my father when you thought he was just a factory worker, hearing how you talked about him behind his back. I made a mistake, Bradley interrupted quickly. I judged him unfairly, and I'm sorry for that. But everyone makes mistakes, Sarah. One bad evening doesn't erase 3 years of marriage. It's not just one evening, Sarah replied. It's a pattern I've been ignoring for too long. She took a deep breath. The way you talk about people who work service jobs, the comments about our friends who aren't as financially successful, how you pushed me to cut ties with my college roommate because she became a public school teacher instead of a real professional. Bradley's facade of contrition slipped slightly. I just want us to surround ourselves with ambitious people who are going somewhere in life. What's wrong with that? Because a person's worth isn't measured by their job title or their bank account, Sarah said, an echo of Eleanor in her voice that made my chest tighten. My mother taught me that, and somewhere along the way, I forgot it. Bradley's expression hardened. So that's it? You're going to throw away our marriage because I'm ambitious and have high standards? No, Sarah said quietly. I'm reevaluating our marriage because I'm not sure we share the same values, and values matter more than ambition. Bradley's eyes flicked to me. This is your doing, isn't it? One night with Daddy Dearest, and suddenly you're full of judgment about the man you married. This is about what I saw with my own eyes, Sarah countered, about behavior I can no longer ignore or excuse. Bradley leaned forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Let me be very clear, Sarah. I'm not walking away from this marriage. We have a life together, plans for the future, plans that, frankly, look a lot more promising now that I understand your financial situation. Is that a threat? Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the pallor of her face. It's a reality check, Bradley replied. We're married. In this state, that means community property. Half of everything you have is legally mine, including whatever inheritance Daddy Warbucks here has been hiding from you. I'd remained silent, allowing Sarah to handle the conversation as she'd requested. But now I spoke, my voice calm and measured. Actually, Bradley, that's incorrect on several counts. The trust established for Sarah was activated last night, after the revelation of your true character. It's protected by multiple legal mechanisms specifically designed to prevent access by opportunistic spouses. Bradley's smile was cold. You're bluffing. No trust can completely shield assets from a spouse in a community property state. This one can, I said confidently. My legal team has been refining these protections for decades. You can challenge it, of course, hire lawyers, file motions, drag this out for years. But you won't win, and you'll bankrupt yourself in the process. Bradley's composure slipped, a flash of uncertainty crossing his features before he masked it. You think you're so clever, don't you? The self-made billionaire outmaneuvering the arrogant young son-in-law. He turned back to Sarah. Is this what you want? To let your father dictate your marriage? My father isn't dictating anything, Sarah replied. He's supporting my right to make my own decisions based on complete information. Information I should have had before I married you. What's that supposed to mean? Bradley demanded. It means I'm questioning whether you would have pursued me so enthusiastically if you'd known about my family's wealth from the beginning, Sarah said. Whether your interest in me was ever about me at all, or just what I represented, a path to the connections and status you craved. Bradley's laugh was bitter. That's rich, coming from a woman who just discovered she's an heiress and suddenly wants to reconsider her marriage. Talk about gold digging. Sarah flinched as if he'd slapped her. I started to rise from my chair, anger surging through me, but Sarah placed a restraining hand on my arm. I think you should leave now, Bradley, she said, her voice quiet but firm. I'll have my things moved out of the house this afternoon while you're at work. We can communicate through lawyers going forward. Bradley stared at her in disbelief. You're leaving me? Just like that. Yes, Sarah said simply. Just like that. For a moment, Bradley seemed genuinely shocked, as if it had never occurred to him that Sarah might actually walk away. Then his expression hardened into something ugly. "You'll regret this," he said, standing abruptly. "Both of you? You think you can humiliate me and just walk away? You have no idea what I'm capable of." "Actually," I said, rising to my feet, "I think we have a very clear understanding of what you're capable of. That's precisely why this conversation is ending." Bradley looked between us, seeming to calculate whether further threats would be productive. Finally, he straightened his tie in a gesture of forced composure. "This isn't over," he said, echoing his words from the night before. "Not even close." As he strode from the room, slamming the door behind him, Sarah released a shaky breath. "I did it," she whispered, sounding surprised at her own courage. "You did," I confirmed, squeezing her shoulder gently. "Your mother would be so proud." Sarah looked up at me, tears brimming in her eyes. "He's not going to make this easy, is he?" "No," I said honestly. "Men like Bradley rarely do, but we'll handle whatever comes next. Together." Outside the private dining room, we could hear Bradley's raised voice as he argued with someone in the main restaurant area. A moment later, the unmistakable sound of breaking glass echoed through the door. "I should go deal with that," I said, moving toward the door. Sarah stood quickly. "I'm coming with you. I'm done hiding from difficult situations." As we stepped back into the restaurant, we found Bradley being escorted toward the exit by 2 security guards, a shattered wine glass on the floor beside an upturned table. "You'll be hearing from my lawyers," he shouted over his shoulder as the guards firmly guided him outside. "Both of you." Robert approached us, looking apologetic. "I'm sorry, Mr. Mitchell." He became quite agitated when you remained in the private dining room.
"It's fine, Robert," I assured him. "Please add the damages to my tab and give the staff my apologies for the disruption." As the staff quickly cleaned up the mess, Sarah watched Bradley's retreating figure through the front windows, his angry gestures visible as he made a phone call from the sidewalk. "I married a stranger," she said softly. "How did I not see it?" "We see what we want to see in the people we love," I replied. "Your mother and I just wanted to protect you from making decisions based on our wealth rather than your own judgment. Instead, I married someone who would have made very different decisions if he'd known about that wealth," Sarah said with bitter irony. "Perhaps," I acknowledged. "But now you have the chance to reclaim the life you want, based on the values that matter to you." Sarah nodded slowly, her eyes still on Bradley as he climbed into a taxi and disappeared from view. "What do we do now?" "About his threats? About the lawyers?" "Now," I said, guiding her toward the elevator. "We go upstairs and call my legal team. Then we contact a locksmith to change the locks on your house, and we send a moving company to collect your personal belongings." "Just like that?" "Just like that," I confirmed. "Bradley's threats are mostly hot air. He has very little legal standing despite what he believes. My team has dealt with situations like this before." As the elevator doors closed, Sarah looked at me with new understanding. "This isn't the first time someone has tried to take advantage of our family, is it?" "No," I admitted. "When you have resources, there will always be people who feel entitled to them. That's another lesson your mother and I hope to protect you from for as long as possible." "I need to understand everything now," Sarah said firmly as we ascended to the penthouse. "About the business, about the foundation, about the legal protections you've put in place." "No more secrets, Dad. I want to be a full partner in our family legacy." I felt a surge of pride at the determination in her voice. "Then that's exactly what you'll be. Starting today." The elevator doors opened to the penthouse, where the morning sun illuminated Eleanor's carefully chosen artwork and family photographs. On the wall directly opposite hung a large portrait of Eleanor that I'd commissioned after her death, capturing her intelligence, her warmth, her quiet strength. Sarah walked straight to it and touched the frame gently. Mom would know exactly what to do right now. She would, I agreed. And I think she'd tell you that the best revenge against someone who undervalued you isn't anger or retaliation. It's living well, Sarah finished, a small smile forming on her lips. On your own terms. Exactly, I said, feeling Eleanor's presence between us. Now let's make sure Bradley understands exactly whose terms he's dealing with. 3 months later, Sarah and I sat in the same private dining room where she had ended her marriage to Bradley, but under vastly different circumstances. The table was laden with legal documents, business reports, and architectural plans for a new Sapphire location in Chicago. The foundation board unanimously approved your proposal, I told her, sliding a folder across the table. They were particularly impressed with the culinary school scholarship program for students from low-income backgrounds. Sarah smiled, her face lighting up in a way I hadn't seen since before Eleanor's illness. Mom would have loved this program. Identifying talent from overlooked communities was always her passion. She would have been even more impressed that you developed it yourself, I replied proudly. In the month since the disastrous dinner with the Townsends, Sarah had immersed herself in learning every aspect of the business I'd built with Eleanor. She'd visited every restaurant location, met with managers and chefs, studied the foundation's work, and even spent time in the factory watching how our custom furniture was made. More importantly, she'd reconnected with the values that had always been at the core of our family's success: hard work, respect for all people regardless of their position, and using wealth as a tool for creating opportunity rather than status. The divorce from Bradley had proceeded more smoothly than either of us had anticipated. After his initial threats and bluster, Bradley had been confronted with the reality of the prenuptial agreement Sarah had signed before their wedding, a document I had insisted upon despite not revealing our full financial situation. The agreement, along with the carefully structured trust that held Sarah's inheritance, had effectively limited Bradley's claims to a reasonable settlement that reflected the legitimate contributions he had made to their short marriage. Bradley's new filing was rejected by the judge, Sarah said, closing a legal document she'd been reviewing. That's the third attempt his lawyers have made to challenge the prenup. And the third rejection, I noted. Even his attorney is advising him to accept the settlement and move on. He won't, Sarah said with certainty. His pride won't let him. This was never really about the money anyway. It was about being bested, about having his true character exposed. Speaking of exposure, I said, sliding a newspaper across the table. Have you seen this? Sarah picked up the business section of the Wall Street Journal, where a small article announced Richard Townsend's promotion to CEO of his investment firm. In the accompanying photo, Richard stood with several board members at a charity event, a Sapphire Foundation fundraiser that Sarah had organized the previous month. Richard called to thank me for our support, I told her. Apparently, his firm was quite impressed by his connection to the Mitchell family. The dinner that Bradley arranged to advance his career ended up benefiting Richard instead. Sarah smiled at the irony. I received a lovely note from Caroline last week. She's joining the Foundation's Arts Education Committee. Life has a way of sorting people into their proper places, I observed. Those who operate with integrity tend to find their way to each other eventually. A knock at the door interrupted our conversation. Robert entered with a young man in a chef's coat. Mr. Mitchell, Mississippi. Mitchell, Chef Williams asked me to bring Marco to meet you. He's the first graduate of our new scholarship program to be hired as a sous chef. The young man stepped forward nervously. Mr. Mitchell, Mississippi Mitchell, I can't thank you enough for this opportunity. Working at Sapphire has been my dream since I was a teenager washing dishes at a diner in my neighborhood. Sarah stood to shake his hand. We should be thanking you, Marco. Antonio says your dessert innovations have already impressed several of our regular patrons. Marco blushed with pride. I never imagined I'd be here. No one from my community gets chances like this. That's exactly what we're trying to change, Sarah told him with genuine warmth. Talent deserves opportunity regardless of where it comes from. After Marco left, Sarah turned to me with determination in her eyes. I want to expand the scholarship program to all 28 restaurants. Identify promising talent in each community and create pathways from entry-level positions to management and chef roles. That's ambitious, I noted. The board will want to see a detailed proposal with budget projections. Already working on it, Sarah assured me. I've been consulting with HR directors at each location to identify current employees who could benefit from additional training. I felt a surge of pride at her initiative. Your mother would be so proud of where you've taken her vision.
Sarah's phone buzzed with an incoming message. She glanced at it briefly and frowned. Bradley, she explained, still sending occasional texts despite his lawyer's advice to communicate only through proper channels. What does he want now? The usual mixture of apologies and accusations, she said, setting the phone aside without responding. He vacillates between wanting me back and blaming me for ruining his life. Has he been showing up at your apartment again? I asked, concerned. After moving out of the house she had shared with Bradley, Sarah had purchased a comfortable but not ostentatious condominium in a secure building downtown. Despite the security measures, Bradley had twice been caught attempting to access the building to talk to Sarah. Not since the restraining order, Sarah assured me. His lawyer made it very clear that violating it would jeopardize the settlement negotiations. I nodded, relieved but still watchful. Men like Bradley rarely accepted defeat gracefully. Enough about him, Sarah said firmly. Tell me about the new location in Austin. Are we still considering the riverfront property? We spent the next hour reviewing expansion plans and foundation initiatives. Sarah's natural business acumen had blossomed in recent months, reminding me so much of Eleanor that it sometimes took my breath away. As we gathered our papers at the end of the meeting, Robert appeared again. Mr. Mitchell, Mississippi. Mitchell, I apologize for the interruption, but there's someone here who's quite insistent on speaking with you. I tensed, immediately assuming it was Bradley. If it's Mr. Harrington, no sir, Robert assured me. It's Mr. Townsend. Richard Townsend. Sarah and I exchanged surprised glances. Send him in, please, I said. Richard entered a moment later, looking somewhat uncomfortable. Howard, Sarah, I apologize for dropping by unannounced like this. I tried calling your office, but your assistant said you were in meetings all day. We were just finishing up, Sarah said, gesturing for him to take a seat. Is everything all right? Richard sat down, placing his briefcase on the table. I'm not sure, to be honest. Something came to my attention this morning that I felt I should bring to you directly, rather than going through official channels. That sounds serious, I observed, studying his troubled expression. It is, Richard confirmed. It's about Bradley Harrington. Sarah stiffened slightly, but maintained her composure. What about him? Richard opened his briefcase and removed a folder. After our dinner several months ago, I had some concerns about Bradley's judgment and transparency. I asked our compliance department to conduct a thorough review of his client accounts. And? I prompted when he hesitated. And we found irregularities, Richard said grimly. Specifically, we discovered that Bradley has been attempting to access confidential information about Sapphire Group's financial structure through his position at our firm. Sarah paled. What kind of information? Details about your private holdings, trust structures, banking relationships, Richard explained. He's been contacting financial institutions that do business with both our firm and Sapphire Group, using his credentials to request information he has no legitimate business need for. I felt a cold anger building inside me. Has he succeeded in accessing any sensitive information? No, Richard assured us. Our security protocols caught the attempts, but his behavior raises serious ethical and potentially legal concerns. Why are you telling us this directly? Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the shock. Wouldn't the normal procedure be to report this to regulatory authorities? Richard nodded. Yes, and that process is underway. But given my personal connection to your family and the unusual circumstances of our acquaintance, I felt you deserved a courtesy notification before official actions begin. I appreciate that, I said sincerely. What happens next? Bradley has been suspended pending investigation, Richard said. His access credentials have been revoked, and we're conducting a full audit of all his activities over the past 3 months. Depending on what we find, this could result in termination and possible referral to regulatory authorities or law enforcement. Sarah closed her eyes briefly. He's really gone this far. I'm afraid so, Richard confirmed. I'm sorry to be the bearer of such news, especially given what you've already been through. Better to know than not know, Sarah replied, composing herself quickly. Thank you for coming to us directly, Richard. After Richard left, Sarah sat in silence for a long moment. He's trying to find a way to attack the trust, she finally said, to find a vulnerability he can exploit. And instead, he's destroyed his own career, I noted. The financial industry takes these violations extremely seriously. Even if he avoids legal consequences, his reputation is finished. He brought this on himself, Sarah said, a new hardness in her voice. Just like everything else. 2 weeks later, we received official confirmation that Bradley had been terminated from his position for grave ethical violations and breach of fiduciary duty. The divorce settlement was finalized shortly thereafter, with Bradley's attorneys suddenly eager to conclude matters without further challenge to the prenuptial agreement. On the evening the final papers were signed, Sarah and I had dinner on the penthouse terrace, watching the city lights come on as dusk fell. She seemed lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. I saw Bradley today, she said as we finished our meal. In the lobby of my attorney's building. I tensed slightly. What happened? Nothing dramatic, she assured me. He looked diminished somehow. His suit wasn't quite as expensive, his watch was missing. He tried to approach me, but my attorney intercepted him. What did he want? Sarah shrugged. The usual, I imagine. To explain, to justify, to manipulate. It doesn't matter anymore. She took a sip of her wine. The strange thing is, I felt sorry for him. Sorry? I echoed in surprise. Not in a way that makes me doubt my decisions, she clarified. But I realize that Bradley will never know what it's like to be valued for who he is, rather than what he has or what he can provide. He'll always be chasing external validation, always measuring his worth through possessions or status. She looked at me with eyes so like her mother's. That's a poverty no amount of money can fix. I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Your mother used to say something similar, that the truly wealthy person isn't the one with the most, but the one who needs the least to be happy. She was right, Sarah said softly. As usual. 6 months after that fateful dinner with the Townsends, we gathered at the opening of Sapphire's newest location, not in Austin as originally planned, but in Sarah's hometown of Albany. The restaurant occupied a beautifully renovated historic building just blocks from the modest house where she had grown up. The guest list included local dignitaries, business associates. 6 months after that fateful dinner with the Townsends, we gathered at the opening of Sapphire's newest location, not in Austin as originally planned, but in Sarah's hometown of Albany. The restaurant occupied a beautifully renovated historic building just blocks from the modest house where she had grown up. The guest list included local dignitaries, business associates, culinary critics, and most importantly, the first graduating class of the Eleanor Mitchell Culinary Scholarship Program, 20 young people from diverse backgrounds who would now begin careers in Sapphire restaurants across the country. I stood at the entrance greeting guests, dressed in a well-tailored suit that Eleanor would have approved of. Elegant, but not ostentatious. Several guests commented on the restaurant's stunning interior, particularly the handcrafted furniture produced at Mitchell Manufacturing. "Your father made these tables?" one critic asked Sarah as she guided a group through the main dining room. "Not personally," Sarah explained with pride, "but they were designed in his workshop and handcrafted by our skilled artisans. My father believes that true luxury isn't about exclusivity, but about quality, craftsmanship, and meaning. Watching her, I couldn't help but marvel at the transformation. Gone was the woman who had once been embarrassed by her father's modest appearance. In her place stood a confident business leader who understood that real value had nothing to do with superficial impressions. Robert, who had been promoted to regional manager after his years of loyal service, approached with a concerned expression. "Mr. Mitchell, there's someone at the door who isn't on the guest list. He's quite insistent about speaking with you." "Bradley?" I asked immediately. Robert shook his head. "No, sir. It's a Mr. Jenkins says he's an old colleague from your early days." I felt a smile spread across my face. "Frank Jenkins? Please, show him in immediately." A moment later, I was embracing a gray-haired man in a well-worn but clean suit, my first employee from 40 years ago, the line cook who had believed in my vision when no one else would. "Howard Mitchell," Frank said, clapping me on the shoulder, "opening a fancy restaurant in the old neighborhood. Who would have thought?" "I would have," I replied honestly, "and Eleanor would have insisted on it." "Come. There's someone I want you to meet." I led Frank through the crowd to where Sarah was speaking with the mayor of Albany. She excused herself politely when she saw us approaching. "Sarah, this is Frank Jenkins, the first person I ever hired. Frank, my daughter Sarah." "The famous Sarah," Frank said, taking her hand warmly. "Your father talked about you so much during those early days that I felt like I knew you before you were born." Sarah smiled. "Dad's told me about you too, how you left a secure position at a prestigious restaurant to join his risky venture." Frank laughed. "Prestigious? It was a greasy spoon downtown. But your father had this vision, you see. He could describe exactly what Sapphire would become, right down to the blue awnings and the community programs." He looked around appreciatively. "And he did it. Everything he said he would." "Not everything," I corrected, feeling a pang of grief. "Eleanor should be here for this." Frank's expression softened. "She is, Howard. Look around. Her touch is everywhere. In the design, in the mission, in your daughter." As if on cue, Antonio called for everyone's attention. The crowd gathered around a wall covered by a blue velvet curtain at the restaurant's entrance. "Ladies and gentlemen," Antonio announced, "it is my honor to welcome you to the newest member of the Sapphire family. But this location is special because it represents a return to our roots and a commitment to our founding principles." He gestured for Sarah and me to join him. "Mr. Mitchell, Mississippi Mitchell, would you do the honors?" Together, Sarah and I pulled the velvet cord, revealing a bronze plaque and a stunning portrait of Eleanor. The plaque read, "Eleanor's Place at Albany, where everyone belongs at the table." Applause filled the room as Sarah stepped forward to address the crowd. My mother believed that food brings people together across all boundaries, economic, cultural, social. She believed that everyone deserves both nourishment for the body and respect for the soul. Sarah's voice was strong and clear. When my father opened his first restaurant, they couldn't afford expensive ingredients or fancy decor. What they offered instead was dignity, treating every customer like they mattered, regardless of what they wore or how much they could spend. She gestured toward the scholarship recipients, standing proudly in their chef whites. That philosophy built this company. And now it's building opportunities for a new generation. She raised her glass. To Eleanor Mitchell, whose vision continues to nourish us all. As the crowd echoed the toast, I noticed a familiar figure standing near the entrance. Bradley, looking thinner and less polished than I remembered, watched the proceedings from a distance. Our eyes met briefly across the crowded room. For a moment, I thought he might approach, but then Sarah spotted him too. Without hesitation, she walked directly toward her ex-husband, her posture confident, but not confrontational. I couldn't hear their brief exchange over the buzz of conversation, but I saw Bradley nod several times before turning to leave. Sarah rejoined me a moment later. "What did he want?" I asked quietly. "To apologize," he said, Sarah replied, "and to see for himself what he had lost through his own actions. Do you believe him?" Sarah considered the question. "I think losing everything, his job, his reputation, his future prospects, has forced him to confront some uncomfortable truths. Whether that will lead to lasting change is another question." "What did you tell him?" "I wished him well," Sarah said simply. "And I meant it. Holding on to anger would only give him continued power over my happiness." The wisdom in her response reminded me so much of Eleanor that I had to blink back tears. "Your mother would be so proud of you," I said, squeezing her hand. "Not because of your success or the business, but because of the woman you've become, someone who understands what truly matters." Sarah smiled, her eyes bright with unshed tears of her own. I had good teachers. As the evening progressed, I found myself watching Sarah as she moved through the crowd, confident, gracious, genuine. The entitled woman who had once been embarrassed by her father's worn clothes was gone. In her place stood someone who understood that true worth had nothing to do with appearances and everything to do with character. Later, as the event wound down, Sarah and I slipped away to the small private dining room named Eleanor's Corner. A single table for two sat beside a window overlooking Albany, the city where our family story had begun. "I've been thinking," Sarah said as we settled into our chairs, "about what happens next." "With the business?" I asked. "With everything," she clarified. "The business, the foundation, our lives." She looked out at the city lights. "I want to honor what you and Mom built, but I also want to make my own contribution." "What did you have in mind?" "An expansion of the foundation," Sarah explained, excitement lighting her features. "Not just culinary scholarships, but a comprehensive program that supports entrepreneurship in underserved communities, microloans, mentorship, business education, helping others build something meaningful from nothing, just like you did." I smiled, feeling a deep pride that had nothing to do with financial success and everything to do with values transmitted across generations. "Your mother would love that idea." "There's something else," Sarah continued, reaching into her purse and removing a small velvet box. She placed it on the table between us. "I found this in Mom's study at the penthouse. It was wrapped and labeled with today's date." I opened the box with trembling fingers to find Eleanor's favorite sapphire earrings, the ones she had worn to the opening of our first restaurant, purchased with our first month of actual profit. "There was a note," Sarah said softly. "For the Albany opening. Remember where we started." I stared at the earrings, remembering Eleanor wearing them as we toasted with cheap champagne in that tiny first restaurant, both of us exhausted, but exhilarated by the possibility of what we were building. "She knew," I whispered. "Somehow, she knew we'd come full circle." Sarah nodded, her eyes bright with tears. She always said Albany would need a sapphire someday, when the time was right. Outside, the last guests were departing, their voices carrying through the quiet evening. Inside Eleanor's Corner, father and daughter sat in comfortable silence, connected by a legacy that had nothing to do with wealth and everything to do with values. "You know," I said finally, "I still have that old Toyota. Never could bring myself to get rid of it." Sarah laughed. "The one Bradley mocked that first night at dinner?" I nodded. "The very same." "We should drive it to the staff meeting tomorrow," Sarah suggested with a mischievous smile. "Show everyone that the Mitchell family still remembers what matters." "Eleanor would approve," I agreed, raising my glass in a final toast. "To old clothes and older values." "To remembering where we came from," Sarah added, touching her glass to mine, "no matter where we end up." As we sat in the warm glow of Eleanor's corner, I thought about the journey that had brought us here, from that disastrous dinner months ago to this moment of hard-won wisdom and reconnection. Bradley's mockery of my old clothes had indeed revealed far more than he intended. It had exposed his own shallow values while ultimately strengthening the bonds of what truly mattered: family, integrity, and the courage to live according to one's deepest convictions. My worn flannel shirts and comfortable jeans had never been a sign of poverty, as Bradley had assumed, but a deliberate choice, a reminder that worth comes from character, not clothing. In his attempt to humiliate me, he had instead initiated his own downfall and Sarah's awakening. As we left the restaurant that night, I caught sight of my reflection in the window, a man comfortable in his own skin, surrounded by a legacy far more valuable than any fortune. Eleanor had been right all along. The clothes don't make the man. It's the man who gives meaning to everything he wears, everything he builds, and everything he passes on to the next generation. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Share your thoughts in the comments below. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.